Welcome to my series of basketball videos where I'll be comparing various NBA grades against each other. I'm doing this because I find that a lot of the basketball videos comparing players on YouTube are too focused on the big names, and sometimes compare players from different positions. For example, lots of people compare Jordan to LeBron and Kobe to Duncan, just because of their similar levels of achievements, but since those players play different positions and have different styles of play, it's not an interesting comparison. In this series, I want to do a comparison not between just more well-known players, but players from days past, in the 1960s, 1970s, 1980s, and even the ABA as well, that most modern fans probably do not have too much knowledge about. Also, as much as possible, I want to compare players that play similar positions and have similar play styles. To me, that's a more interesting and fruitful comparison. I'll be using 6 different metrics to compare each player. The first category is scoring. This category will be defined by each player's career points per game, peak points per game both in the regular season and playoffs, and number of scoring titles. Rebounding. This category will be defined by each player's career rebounds per game, peak rebounds per game both in the regular season and playoffs, and number of rebounding titles. Passing. This category will be defined by each player's career assists per game, peak assists per game both regular season and playoffs, and number of assist titles. Efficiency and advanced metrics. This category will be defined by each player's career true shooting percentage per and win shares per 48, both in the regular season and playoffs. The reason I use true shooting percentage is because it's more fair to guards. Field goal percentage tends to be biased to big men because of their height and play style closer to the basket. I also put in win shares per 48 here because it encompasses efficiency along with other attributes to give you an idea of how many wins a player contributes to his team. Defense. This category will be defined by each player's all defensive selections, defensive win shares, and defensive player of the year awards. The reason I'm not using blocks and steals in this comparison is because I want to compare the achievements of older players that modern fans might not have too much knowledge about, and players in the 1960s and early 1970s do not have steals and blocks tracked. Awards. This category will be defined by All-Star appearances, All-NBA selections, MVPs, Finals MVPs, and championships as the first, second, or third best player. The reason I have to only count championships as a top 3 player on the team is because otherwise you get into the situation where, for example, Robert Horry has 7 rings and Karl Malone has 0, and it's not representative of how much better a player is if they weren't a top 3 player on their team contributing to a championship. I know including All-Star selections is a little bit controversial because it's fan voted, but ultimately this is what the Hall of Fame uses in their criteria to induct a player, as unfair as it sounds. Also, I'll be including ABA stats and awards and using them as equivalent to their respective NBA stats and awards. The only one that's different about the ABA is that instead of Finals MVP, they have Playoffs MVP, which honestly is a better idea than Finals MVP since it accounts for the whole playoffs, but just to keep it simple, I'll be referring to the ABA Playoffs MVP as Finals MVP here. Also, no All-NBA third team selections are counted, because All-NBA third teams weren't added until the late 80s, which is unfair to older players. Also, I'm not using any career total stats because that's a longevity thing. For example, no one would say that Karl Malone was a better scorer than Michael Jordan, even though he has more total points. And of course, this is only going to be my opinion from comparing the available metrics, since I have not watched most of these players live, or even been born when some of these players have been playing. And to keep it fair, I'm judging them based on how they did in their own era. No time travel or what if this NBA player played in today's era or the 1960s, none of that. I'll be strictly basing their stats and accomplishments within their own era against that era's competition, which makes the most sense to me. So I hope you guys enjoy this comparison video and hopefully learn something new from it. The 16th episode in the series looks at 2 all-time overlooked and underrated 1970s centers. Wes Unseld was the anchor and heart of the 1970s Washington Bullets, a team which made the finals 4 times in the 1970s, more than any other team during that decade, not counting the ABA Indiana Pacers. Unseld never cared about his stats and focused purely on helping his team win, and the success of his Bullets team in that decade proves that. Nate the Great Thurmond is best known as the defensive anchor of the 1960s and 1970s Golden State Warriors, but unlike Unseld, never won a championship, although he earned admiration from players like Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and Wilt Chamberlain for his tough defensive skills. Which player had the greater career? Let's find out. In this category, it's easy to tell who was the better scorer. Although Wes Unseld could definitely put up points if his team needed it, that was not his main job on the team, leaving that to his Bullets teammates Elvin Hayes, as well as Gus Johnson, Earl Monroe, and Bob Dandridge during different points of his career. Still, Unseld averaged 10.8 points per game for his career, peaking at 16.2 per game in 1970, and 10.6 points per game in the playoffs, peaking at 18.8 per game in 1969. Nate Thurmond was definitely more of a primary scorer on his team, although he shared those duties with Wilt Chamberlain and Rick Barry earlier in his career. Thurmond averaged 15 points per game for his career, peaking at 21.9 points per game in 1970, and 11.9 points per game in the playoffs, peaking at 25.4 points per game in 1972. This category isn't particularly close, and the advantage goes to Nate Thurmond. In the rebounding category, it's very close, as we have two of the greatest rebounders of all time here. Unseld was one of the greatest undersized rebounders of all time. Despite being only 6'7", he averaged an astounding 14 rebounds per game for his career, peaking at an incredible 18.2 rebounds per game in 1969. In the playoffs, he averaged 14.9 rebounds per game, peaking at a Bill Russell-like 23.6 rebounds per game in 1970. He also has a rebounding title. Thurmond, albeit taller than Unseld, also put up great numbers. 15 rebounds per game for his career, peaking at an astonishing 22 rebounds per game in 1968. Wilt Chamberlain, Bill Russell, and Jerry Lucas are the only other players who have ever averaged over 20 rebounds per game in a season. In the playoffs, he averaged 13.6 rebounds per game, peaking at 23.1 rebounds per game in 1967. This category is just too close to call. You could say that Unseld's numbers are more impressive given his height, but as both players put up Rodman and Wilt-like rebounding numbers in their prime, I'll just have to call this one a tie. In the passing category, it's not that close. Although Thurmond was a solid passer for his size, averaging 2.7 assists per game for his career, peaking at 4.2 assists per game in 1968, and 2.8 assists per game in the playoffs, peaking at 4.7 a game in 1967. Wes Unseld is one of the best passing centers of all time, especially known for his outlet passes. He averaged 3.9 assists per game for his career, peaking at 5.2 a game in 1976, and 3.8 assists per game in the playoffs, peaking at 4.9 assists per game in 1977. One of the iconic Unseld plays is to grab a rebound and immediately throw down an outlet pass to a streaking teammate for an easy bucket. So this advantage definitely goes to Unseld. In the efficiency and advanced metrics category, although their PERs are very similar, Unseld has a clear advantage in true shooting percentage and win shares per 48. As Thurmond was not a particularly efficient player, especially for his size, so this category goes to Unseld. In the defense category, it's closer than you might think. Nate Thurmond is widely regarded by older players as one of the best defensive players of his era and of all time, on par with Wilt Chamberlain in his era. Although blocks were not tracked for most of his career, he averaged 2.2 blocks a game when he was 34 years old after they started tracking them, which gives us an idea of how dominant he might have been when he was younger. He also has 5 all-defensive selections, but Unseld is no slouch on defense either, as he was a terrific defender as well, and his win shares actually exceed that of Thurmond's, although he was never on the all-defensive team. Despite their close numbers in defensive win shares, because they played in the same era and Thurmond always got the all-defensive selection over Unseld, this category will ultimately go to Nate Thurmond. In the awards category, it's not that close, and this is partly a result of bad timing on Thurmond. Thurmond came into the league at a time when Russell and Wilt were dominating, and then Kareem came into the league after that. Therefore, he was never selected to an All-NBA team due to the competition at the center position. He also never won a championship despite going to the finals twice, with Wilt the first time and Rick Barry the second time. Unseld, on the other hand, had a lot more success as he went to 4 NBA finals during the 1970s, won an MVP in his rookie season, the last player to do so, and made an All-NBA first team as well. He also had a championship as a top 3 player on his team and a finals MVP, which is a substantial advantage over Thurmond. It's notable that Thurmond was in his prime when Unseld entered the league, and Unseld still won the MVP and took All-NBA honors over him. Thurmond does have more All-Star selections than Unseld, but that's not enough to give him the edge here, so this category will go to Unseld. So when all the categories are summed up, Nate Thurmond takes the scoring and defense categories, while Wes Unseld takes the passing efficiency and awards categories, while rebounding is a tie, giving the win to Unseld. Both players are rarely mentioned by modern fans and very underrated today. Nate Thurmond is rightly known as a tremendous defensive player and rebounder, a Golden State Warriors legend who gave everyone in his era a tough time at the basket, while Wes Unseld just did everything for his team, rebounding, passing, defense, and all the things that don't show up on the stat sheet. To this day, the Washington Wizards, which are the successor to the Bullets, have never obtained as much success as it did in the 70s under Unseld's leadership. Hope you guys enjoyed this comparison. Thanks for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe, and stay tuned for the next comparison video.